Hey guys, my name is Michael Niles. This is from Moody Bible Institute class reading the Old Testament Biblical Studies. This is for 7.2 and the class is under Professor Babcock. We're supposed to pick a controversial subject regarding the New Testament. I picked a scary one. It's called Speaking in Tongues. I picked this because I thought about it a lot last year and have done some study on it and wanted to talk about it. Very jam-packed subject, so I'm going to jump right into it. I've got 5 minutes, going to talk pretty fast about this. First, I just want to read a bit in 1 Corinthians. In verse 8, it says, "Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away." A bit further down in chapter 14, Paul says to the Corinthians, "Now I want you to all speak in tongues." So if Paul says we should all speak in tongues, then why is it that there's so much controversy on it? Well, to answer that, we need to go back a bit earlier to when we first saw tongues, and that would be in Acts 2. So I'm going to read a bit from Acts. It says in Acts 2, when the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place. This is the early church, the very first people in the church. "And suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting, and divided tongues as of fire appeared to them, and rested on each one of them. And they were filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterances." In the next few verses, the people of Jerusalem come out. They're there for Pentecost, and they say, they're drunk. They're going all wacky. And Peter comes out, and he's like, "Come on, guys, it's morning. We aren't drunk. People get drunk at night." And so he continues to share the gospel, and what he does is he shares this prophecy from Joel. I'll read it here, and it says, "And in the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit on flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams." And we think last days, and we're like, oh, that's Revelation stuff. But that's not it. It's when Jesus came back to earth. That's the last days. The last days are now. The speaking in tongues came, the dreaming dreams and visions came. So we're already in the last days. And so over the next few verses, he continues to share the gospel with them, and he says, this is about Jesus. The last days are now. And that day, 3,000 people became part of the Christian church. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is this prophecy about? What it was a warning to the Jews, and it was a warning that the end times were coming, and that judgment was coming. About 65 years later, 70 AD, the Romans came into Jerusalem and destroyed it. And the Israelites didn't become a nation again until 1943. That's about 60 years ago. Actually 70. And so what Joel was saying was, when you start hearing tongues, people speaking in tongues even though they've had no study in it, it's a warning. The end times are coming. So if that's it, then why don't we just speak in tongues? Because we're in the end times right now. Well, going back to 1 Corinthians, it says, "Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away." And so what we see here is the two things, prophecies passing away and knowledge passing away, uses the same word. And it's plural. So what it is another event causes them to pass away. And this is talking about the return of Christ, I believe. And, excuse me. And so when Christ comes back, an outside forces cause these things to cease. Because Jesus is here, we no longer need prophecies. He's here. But right in between it says, "As for tongues, they will cease." A different word. And it's not plural. It's middle. And Greek syntax, by middle, it means that in and of itself it ends. And so why is it that it's ended? Well, the thing is, the prophecy's been fulfilled. It was a warning to the Israelites. And so now that that prophecy's been fulfilled, there's no longer any purpose for speaking in tongues to be around. Now in 1 Corinthians 14, it talks a lot about edifying, and I wish you could all speak in tongues. So why does he wish this for us? Gotta remember exegesis. Is he speaking to the Corinthians back in the early church? Not necessarily to us. Things have changed over time. And so we still hear a lot of people speaking in tongues sometimes. And we wonder, how can tongues be gone if people still speak in tongues? Well, I've known some people who do this, and in fact, one of my earlier pastors, he used to do it, but he stopped because he said it really wasn't edifying him. He didn't know what he was saying. If you don't know where he's saying, where is it really coming from? And he said it's more just a hypnotic trance that people teach themselves because they want to speak in tongues. And maybe there is still some speaking in tongues in some places, but it definitely isn't common anymore. So that is my 5-minute video on speaking in tongues. Very fast, a lot of jam-packed stuff in there, but hopefully very helpful. Yeah, guys, have a great day.